In the ancient world, temples existed for one reason above all others. They were places where gods lived. They were built to house divine presence permanently, where the gods could be fed, revered, protected, and maintained every single day. Which makes this place difficult to explain, because everything about it looks like a temple. The columns, the pylons, the reliefs. Heck, it's even called a temple. And yet it wasn't designed to function as a god's home. This temple was built for a different reason, and understanding why it exists means rethinking what ancient temples were actually for. Today we're going to visit two ancient Egyptian temple complexes, both of them within the modern city of Luxor, the city called Thebes by the Greeks and Waset by the Egyptians. The first is Karnak Temple. When people think of ancient Egyptian temples, this is usually the first one that comes to mind. Massive, enclosed, built up over centuries. It feels like the rule book for how temples are supposed to work. But there's another famous temple nearby, Luxor Temple, that was strangely different. And that's the one that doesn't seem to fit the template. There's something quietly strange about that place that most visitors never stop to think about. By any reasonable measure, Karnak was the greatest temple complex ever built in the ancient world. It had been growing for centuries before Luxor Temple even existed. Civilizations don't usually build another eye-popping temple right next to something like that. So before we go to Luxor Temple, we're going to start at Karnak, because it shows us what a long-standing temple is supposed to be. Maybe the biggest mistake people make here in Luxor is assuming every temple was meant to function like Karnak. Mind you, we've seen mortuary temples, but those are near the grave sites. Karnak and Luxor temples were in the city. For nearly 3,000 years, the Karnak temple complex was the religious center of Egypt, a place where kings came to assert their legitimacy and priests came to maintain the balance of the cosmos. The first thing modern visitors encounter is also one of the last major additions, the first pylon, built by Nekhnebef I in the 4th century BCE. It's massive, unfinished, and deliberately enclosing everything behind it. Even at the very end of Egyptian history, the impulse here wasn't to redesign the temple, but to gather it up, to wrap centuries of sacred space inside a new jacket. That tendency tells you a lot about how Egyptians thought about holy ground. Once something was sacred, it stayed sacred. We made it to Karnak. It's called Karnak Temple, but to be honest, it's really not just a temple. It's a temple complex containing many temples. There are 3 main temple precincts here, one dedicated to Amun-Ra, one to Mut, and one to Mantu. We are entering the Amun-Ra temple right now, which is the biggest, but it covered an area of 250 square acres about, so huge. This place was not called Karnak back then. It was called Opet, which means the most choice of places, the most sacred of places. That was the ancient Egyptian name. Today it's called Karnak. But we're going to go into the Amun temple. We're going to see how much of it is left. So let's go. Beyond the pylon, the space opens into the Great Court. This was one of the more public areas of the temple, and it's where royal imagery dominates. One of the most important things to understand about Karnak is that it wasn't placed here randomly. Recent geoarchaeological research has shown that this entire complex sits on what was once a natural island, a patch of elevated ground surrounded by Nile channels. In Egyptian creation myths, the world begins when the first mound of dry land rises out of the primeval waters of chaos. Karnak physically embodied that idea. During the annual Nile inundation, much of the surrounding landscape flooded. This ground remained higher. As the waters receded, the temple quite literally appeared to rise again from the flood. To the left of the entranceway stands a bark shrine of Seti II, built in the 13th century BCE, prior to the construction of the first pylon we just passed through. The shrine housed 3 sacred barks, boats, each dedicated to the main gods of Karnak, Amun, Mut, and Mantu. To the right of the entranceway is a larger bark shrine built by Ramses III a few decades later. Both of them would have stood outside the main temple entrance in their own time, which is directly before us. This one was built earlier. It was begun by Ramses I the founder of the 19th dynasty, and continued by his son Seti I and his son Ramses II, who added colossal statues of himself flanking the doorway. A visual reminder that the king stood between humanity and the god. Interestingly, much later, Ptolemy VI, one of the Macedonian rulers of Egypt, remodeled all the reliefs as they had worn down over many centuries. In doing so, he basically destroyed much of what was left of the originals, but he was extremely faithful in recreating them exactly as they had been. But we know he did this because he added his name in a few spots. Karnak is the largest temple complex in the world, ever built in the history of humanity. And it is a wealth of information that we find here on its walls, not only for this temple and what happened here, but also for the history of Egypt. Throughout the New Kingdom, almost every single king contributed to it in some way, shape, or form. Now this temple was here. There was an original construction started in the Middle Kingdom under Senusret I, so that goes way back. And there will be things here even from the Roman period, so it's over 1,000 years of construction that we're looking at here, each with a piece of its own history. Seti I and Ramses II aren't responsible only for the pylon, but the entire section to follow, the great Hypostyle Hall. This entire area, the pylon and the hall, became a massive foresection to the Karnak Temple in the 19th dynasty. We're here in the great Hypostyle Hall between the second and third pylons. This was conceived by Seti I, the father of Ramses the Great, originally to be separate from the Amun Temple, but it ultimately got incorporated into it. And along the procession way here, this divides it in half. There's 134 total columns, but half of them are on the north side, and the images on them represent the great military victories of Seti. And then over here on this side, on the south side, these represent the great victories of Ramses II, his son. In antiquity, this hall would have been dimly lit, with narrow clerestory windows allowing controlled shafts of light into a space otherwise draped in shadow. The effect was intentional. Egyptian temples were meant to guide movement from brightness toward darkness, from openness toward restriction. The columns themselves evoke marsh plants, recalling the environment from which the first mound of creation emerged. Even the floor subtly rises as you move inward, reinforcing the sense of ascent. Every available surface here is covered in reliefs. Some show ritual acts, offerings, purifications, encounters between king and god. On the outer walls, Seti I and Ramses II commemorate victories in Syria, Canaan, and Libya. The king defeats chaos so that order can endure. History, myth, and ritual are not separated here. They're layered together. On the other side of the Hypostyle Hall is another pylon, and this one was created in the previous dynasty, the 18th, by Amenhotep III in the 14th century BCE. Back then, he wanted to create a new entranceway to the temple, so he placed it in front of one that had been created by Thutmose I before him. Only the bottom half of his once towering pylon still stands, but you can see some fabulous reliefs on it. When archaeologists were working here, they found that Amenhotep had used blocks from earlier shrines to construct it. One of the things Karnak does better than almost any site in Egypt is preserve its own history, sometimes accidentally. Blocks from dismantled monuments ended up reused inside later pylons. Entire shrines disappeared into the fabric of the building, only to be rediscovered centuries later. The White Chapel of Senusret I and the Red Chapel of Hatshepsut were both found taken apart and reused as fill. Today they've been reconstructed, giving us rare glimpses into much earlier phases of ritual life here. The pylons get smaller as we go back in time, further into the temple. Thutmose I built two of them, the fourth, a bigger one on the outside, and the fifth, a smaller one on the inside. Two granite obelisks once adorned the fourth pylon, but only the right one still stands. Look at the size of it. They brought this all the way from Aswan and erected it here. Thutmose's daughter Hatshepsut put up 2 obelisks of her own at the 5th pylon, but only the left one remains in position. Did you know there were once 20 obelisks of various sizes erected here? Alas, not many still stand. We are now getting into the center of the temple, into the holiest sections. Much of this area was remodeled by Thutmose III. On the wall here is an account written by Thutmose III's scribe, Cheneni, about the Battle of Megiddo, one of Thutmose's greatest victories, where he defeated a coalition of Canaanite kings and took over a large portion of the Levant.
So it's telling us that we're entering, and it's a divine gate. It's actually a place of knowledge, a place of a sacred place. So some people will take this out of context and say that Seba means stargate, as if you're going to transport to another dimension. In a sense, you're leaving, one space going to a more sacred space, but you're not transporting, to another planet or anything like that there. It's just Seb, right here again, Seb. The S, the S sound, the B, and then the determinative is for the gate, Seba.
Doesn't the government make it a little cooler? Come on.
Yeah, what about glowing cooling, man?
Water fountain.
The big open area is where the oldest part of the Karnak temple stood. Not much of it is left. Further east is the festival hall of Thutmose III, often overlooked because it doesn't fit the standard temple aesthetic. Its columns resemble tent poles rather than plant stems, reflecting the king's military life. Inside, reliefs depict plants and animals encountered during campaigns in the Levant. This is a record of Thutmose's empire brought home to Amun, the foreign world cataloged and absorbed into the temple as an offering to Amun. This is a new feature of Thutmose's temple here. Now, none of this is original, but it's based on the original. There was here a king list, and they've recently reconstructed it. Now, the interesting thing about this king list is, unlike some other king lists, it's not in chronological order. It doesn't include all of the kings. It does go back into the Old Kingdom. You can see Snefru up there, the third one, but these are not even in order. It seems to be like a best of list by Thutmose, the ones that he liked especially. But if you consider this from a historical perspective, even though maybe these are not in order and they don't have all the kings, we can still get information from it because we get the names of kings who existed, right? So this is historical information. And we also get to know a little bit about the tastes of Thutmose himself in regard to that. But we're going to be seeing an even better king list when we go to Abydos.
Used to be closed chapel with 2 doors.
Especially in a place like this, you should be blessed.
Here we have the gate to enter from this side of the temple complex. This is the enclosure wall with a massive monumental gate. Just give you an idea of the size. Now do you believe in giants? There are 3 main temples here, right?
the one to Amun-Re, the one to Mut, and the one to Mantu. And everything we have seen is just the one Amun-Re temple. The other ones are outside the enclosure wall. They're smaller anyway, but that's how big the Amun temple is. I mean,
What about that way down there?
that's part of the,
temple.
yeah, that's part of this one.
All part of
Yeah. Yeah, that's how large this complex was.
What becomes clear walking through Karnak is that Egyptian temples weren't really designed to be finished. They grew outward. They absorbed earlier buildings. They collected memories. Kings added themselves to something that already existed. And in doing so, they tied their rule to everything that came before. Near the center of the complex is the sacred lake. This is where priests purified themselves before entering the deeper parts of the temple.
Here we are is what is called the Bubastite portal. This is a section with an inscription that was put here by none other than Sheshonq I, also known as Shoshenq or Shishak. Okay, and he was one of the rulers of the Libyan dynasty. They ruled from Bubastis, and that's why it's called the Bubastite portal. But they too contributed to Karnak, and this is even after the new kingdom was gone. But the Libyans did reunite Egypt for a brief period. And here he's talking about one of his campaigns into the Levant. And all of these little images you see of people are all of the places that he conquered on this campaign. Now, why this is important is because many people have worked to try to tie this in with the Bible. Because in the Bible, in the book of Kings, it is said that Jerusalem was attacked, and also Samaria was attacked by Shishak, it says in the Bible. And we have identified that with Shoshenq. And so we looked here on this list for the names of the Israelite cities, but unfortunately they're not in there. However, it is in the general vicinity. And so this has become kind of a chronological link to the Bible and even helping to date the events in the Bible. So this happened around the year 925 BCE. And so if that is correct, and this is the campaign in which Shoshenq did attack the Israelites, then that would mean that that story is from 925 BCE, and that's how you can link it up with the chronology of the kings from the Bible.
So Karnak is the model Egyptian temple complex. Each temple in it, a permanent home for a god, enclosed, layered, and built to last. Now with that model in mind, the next temple we're going to visit is going to raise some quiet questions. Unlike Karnak, which grew steadily from the Middle Kingdom onward, Luxor Temple came into being much later and in a narrower window. Indeed, by the time it was built, Karnak was already ancient. Luxor didn't replace Karnak, though. It didn't compete with it. It was a sort of companion.
Okay, here we are on the Avenue of the Sphinxes, as it's called. It's a sacred way that runs all the way from Karnak Temple, where we were this morning, down here to Luxor Temple, where we are now. 1.7 miles from one end to the other. And this was a sacred way that was put in place here by Hatshepsut herself. She was the one who set it up. Now, down there at Karnak Temple, we know about the things that she added to that. We also know that she put this street here and parts of Luxor Temple. Now, at both places, they scratched her image out. They don't want to give her any credit, but we're going to give her credit. And the plan was, of course, for at the Opet festival every year, for the sacred boat. You can see a replica of it here, carrying the image of Amun-Ra. You have his wife Mut and their son Khonsu, and the triad of Thebes, and they were brought down here from one end to the other for the sacred Opet festival, which lasted for 11 days in the time of Hatshepsut, but it will be expanded later. By the time you get to Ramses' time, I think it was like 24 days that this festival ran. It was a big deal. Anyway, you will see three types of sphinxes along the sides. When Hatshepsut first started installing them on the sides, it was just rams. You'll just see the rams. They are the oldest ones. Then in the second phase, King Tut himself, Tutankhamun, added ones that were rams' bodies with human heads. But this finally wasn't finished until the time of Nekhnebef in the 30th dynasty, Nekhnebef I, and he added the regular sphinxes, the ones with the lions' bodies and the humans' heads. Today, they're not all here. Most of them are on this side and are on the side near Karnak. Not many in the middle. They haven't all survived. But in the time of the 30th dynasty, this whole street would have been lined with sphinxes. And here we are at the temple itself, the great Luxor Temple. This temple is an unusual temple. It's not a temple dedicated to a specific god. It's not a temple dedicated to a specific pharaoh. It's a temple specifically for the renewal and rejuvenation of the kingship. And in fact, it is said that the king himself would have been crowned. The coronation ceremony would have taken place here, at which the divine Ka would enter the king and he would become a god. You know, the Ka is the spirit of one of the spirits that the Egyptians believed was in a person. It was the animating spirit. And there are Kas for everything, but there was a special Ka, of course, the Ka of the gods that would enter the pharaoh. Other people didn't get that. And that's how a simple human would become a divine being. Alexander the Great, I guess in order to, make the claim to the throne of Egypt, he said that he went through the coronation ceremony here at Luxor Temple, but we have some doubts at whether he ever even came to Thebes, so there's that question. This was called the Southern Sanctuary by the Egyptians, and many kings added to it. Hatshepsut, of course, made it the original big one, and then it was added to by Amenhotep III, who also built at Karnak. King Tutankhamun added to this. Then, of course, Ramses II, you know him. He added this pylon that you see in the front with all these images of himself. And then you have, even later, after the New Kingdom, Penedjem I, the high priest of Amun at Thebes, here also added to this. And Nekhnebef, who I mentioned about with the Avenue of the Sphinxes, the 30th dynasty, the last dynasty that was native to Egypt, he also added to Luxor Temple. You may be wondering why we're here at night. Well, I'll tell you why. NEXT got us in after hours. Adept expeditions, they know how to work it. Normally this place is just crawling with people, throngs and throngs of people during the day. And guess who's here now? Only our tour group. That's it. NEXT arranged it for us. So now we can explore this temple on our own as if we were the ones who first discovered it.
There were once 6 colossal granite statues of Ramses here, 4 standing and 2 seated, and 2 obelisks. It was fairly recently that one of the statues and one of the obelisks were taken away. They're now in Paris. Sometimes you hear people talk about how these statues are perfectly symmetrical, so symmetrical that you would need advanced technology to make them. Well, they do have wonderful symmetry, but I can tell you from looking up close that they're not perfect. But they are amazing. It tells you about the great skill of Egyptian craftsmen and engineers in the New Kingdom period.
Oh, look at, I just realized there's those niches just like Philae.
Yes.
Or was it Edfu? Yeah.
Edfu.
Edfu, yeah.
And
For the must have been poles there, right? Flag poles.
Yep, they would have had Asiatic copper stapled against the side, and the wood would have been the cedars of Lebanon, and they would have been they would have used the top.
So we can see that Ramses II not only added a major entranceway to the Karnak temple, but also one here. And just as the pylon at Karnak fronted a magnificent hall, so it does here. Inside is the great court that Ramses commissioned. We now enter the colonnade, built under Tutankhamun and completed by Horemheb, one of the most historically informative spaces in Egypt.
So right over here, you can see King Tutankhamun. Yeah, this part of the temple was put up here by him, and these reliefs that you see along here are from his reign. And down here, ignore this, these deeper ones, these deeper carvings, this is Ramses style. So all down here, this is all Ramses. But up here is the older stuff. And this is where we get a lot of our information about how the sacred procession was carried out, is a depiction of it. It starts on this end of the wall, goes all the way down that wall, across the back wall, and then back again to show the procession from Karnak to Luxor, and then back again. So you can see here at the beginning, you can see a couple of columns here. These are representing the Karnak Temple. You may have seen them over there. And then we have a representation of the sacred procession going along here. So for example, right over here, we have the priests carrying the sacred boat of Amun-Re. You see them? Carrying it along here, right? And they're carrying many other things as well. There's other people in the procession. There's musicians, and basically there's quite a large number of people in the sacred procession. But this is showing it stage by stage as it goes along, all the way down the wall.
The core of Luxor Temple is the work of Amenhotep III, one of the longest reigning and wealthiest kings Egypt ever had. By the time Amenhotep III began building here, Egypt was at the height of its international power. And it was built at a time when kingship itself was being re-theorized. There's no evidence that Luxor ever functioned as a permanent residence of a god in the way Karnak did. The daily cult, feeding, clothing, washing the god, remained centered at Karnak, even after this temple was built. This one came alive at specific times.
Says there's a sanctuary.
Inside these chambers, beyond the view of the crowd, the king underwent rituals tied to renewal, the reaffirmation of his Ka, his divine life force. In Egyptian political theology, the king's ability to rule depended on these rites continuing to work. One of the clearest statements of Luxor's purpose appears in a small chamber near the sanctuary, the so-called birth room, dating to the reign of Amenhotep III. Here the god Khnum is shown shaping both the body and the Ka of the king on a potter's wheel. The message is unambiguous. The king is not merely chosen by the gods, he is produced by them.
So this is the part of the sanctuary that was added by Alexander the Great. I mean, may not have actually come here, but it was, he sponsored the addition. And here's a representation of Alexander himself standing before the god Min. Actually, this is not Min, it's a combination of Min and Amun. But anyway, up there is the cartouche, actually two cartouches of Alexander. So here's Alexander as Pharaoh. It's interesting, in the ancient world, if you're polytheistic, it's not like you're like, well, I'm not worshiping their gods, I'm going to worship my gods. They were like, oh, all the gods are good. We love all the gods. So Alexander, even though he was Greek, he didn't have any problem worshiping. Yeah.
What's one more?
Yeah.
What happened after the Egyptians came under foreign rule reinforces how unusual this place is. During the Roman period, parts of the temple were converted into a military fortress. Emperors were worshipped here. By the 4th century CE, Christian churches occupied several chambers. So the function changed, but the sacredness didn't.
By the way, the capitals of the columns are closed lotus flowers, and the ones at Karnak are open. So the open ones represent the day, and these represent the night.
Okay.
Kind of appropriate that we're here at night then. You can tell they don't think like we do, like, well, what's the cheapest we can do it, or what's the least amount that's necessary. That's how we often think.
Yeah.
Walking these two temple complexes back to back changes how you feel about this city. You start to see ancient Waset less as a collection of monuments and more as a living network, one that people moved through and depended on. By the way, if you like looking at images of ancient monuments, I've put together a free screensaver pack with high-resolution images from my travels, including shots from places like this. So if you want a small reminder of what it feels like to walk through ancient places, you can grab that for free using the link below. In our next episode, our exploration of Luxor continues as we head into the places of the royal dead. The Valley of the Kings, the Valley of the Queens, and Deir el Medina, where the workers who created the tombs lived. And that's where the story will get much more personal.